And we're going to do some of the reading today, I think. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those things. So, go in here. All right. So we're going to be reading the play Macbeth. It's commonly referred to as the Scottish play. Most people who are in theater and who are in literary circles won't even refer to the play's name. If you refer to the play's name while you're either performing it or while you're performing another play, you are said to risk disaster on your play. So there's a big superstition around this. So we're going to talk about a couple of things with Macbeth. So we'll talk about the meanings behind it, look at the historical context, which we got a little bit in there, and we're also going to talk about witches and witchcraft, because of course we are. There's witches in it, so why wouldn't we? All right. So it's designed first and foremost to be a historical thriller. This is considered a history play, but it's also fictional. Okay? And it's also considered a tragedy. It moves fast. Everything happens really quickly, and people, there's deaths and there's destruction and there's a war and there's a moving forest and there's all kinds of different things. And there's some what's I'm looking for? Deception in thinking things are going to go one way, but they end up going another way, right? So there's a lot of really good stuff in Macbeth, and I'll try to make it so that it's not too bad. We also are going to look into some of the psychology behind Macbeth. There's some really good stuff out there about what happens when somebody who feels guilt after they've committed a crime, like how do they deal with that? If you had me last year, we talked about sort of that idea of dealing with remorse with dark romanticism. What do you do whenever somebody feels bad about doing something, right? Do you feel bad whenever you steal something? Do you feel bad whenever you kill somebody? Hopefully, right? And Macbeth and Lady Macbeth slowly sort of devolve into what they ultimately become because of their actions and how that sort of affects them overall. Yeah.
I watch a lot of shows, murders, like crime shows.
Mm-hmm.
So notice and the problem get angry, shout.
Yep.
They don't realize what they have to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And shock caused it.
Yeah.
Feelings.
Yeah. And I think something important in this is that the murder that happens is a premeditated murder, but it's also like not premeditated. And you'll see what I mean whenever we start reading it. We're also going to look at some of the political and social realism that happens in this, because there have been times over and over and over again throughout history where people are killing other people. People are, going behind each other's backs and things like that in order to gain more power. So power is ultimately the driving force here. Yeah.
And like Ptolemy Cleopatra.
Yes.
Ptolemy took power. She wound up being brother, and she wound up marrying Caesar.
Yeah, I mean, and if you look back through history, there are literally hundreds of examples just like that point us to these people who are making these decisions because they want more power, right? Because we have witches, we also have some ghosts. There's a lot of illusions that happen in this play, and so things where maybe they look like they're going to go one way, but they end up going another way. We have a lot of ideas in this and different themes, and we'll talk about some of those. So appearance versus reality, for example. We also are going to talk about some gender roles in this. Shakespeare is notorious for making really, really awful female characters, and this is the first play, and probably the only play that he has, where the female character that he provides does have a motivation other than to just end up married or to just end up being a one-dimensional character. She helps her husband become a king through her actions. And so there's a lot that we can talk about with what role does she play versus what role does her husband play in this. And then ultimately it's a tragedy because we have a person who was seen as somebody who was great, and they're told this one thing, and it ends up driving them into crime and destruction, essentially. Yeah, pretty much. So a couple things with this. So Shakespeare was not a historian. He liked to write historical plays, but he was not a historian. A lot of his stuff was very, it was historical fiction, so he took a lot of license in there. He did know that there was a lot of stuff in there, like we've talked about, that there's a lot of different things that happen over the course of history that allow things to be common themes. Okay, so in the 11th century, so the 1000s, it's a long time ago, Scotland was violent and a troubled country. There was a lot of feuding families and clans. And the castle was the power base for each rival warlord. And so Macbeth will start out as a thane or a warlord, meaning he's really good in battle. He's an excellent soldier. And then those people who were considered excellent soldiers ultimately would become king. This is before we had the passing down of like you inherit the throne. Like if you're born to a king, you automatically become the king whenever that person dies or leaves the throne. And then, because of that, because there was all of this conflict, political murder and revenge killings were commonplace. It happened all the time. If somebody wanted to be king and they didn't like the guy who was king right now, they just killed him. Yeah, pretty much. And sometimes those were state sanctioned, meaning that the people who were in charge were like, okay, sure. So the real Macbeth was born in 1005. He was the son of a ruling family. His father was murdered by his cousin, and so he married the granddaughter of the High King of Scotland. So he was born into royalty, but he was not automatically going to assume the throne, if that makes sense. Okay, I just want to make sure I get these all right. All right. So Duncan, who was the king at the beginning of the play, was actually the king of Scotland. The time that Real Macbeth was born. Duncan was 38 at the time of his murder, and the murder could have potentially been actually committed by Macbeth. We're not for sure. Macbeth was then elected High King of Scotland. He ruled for 17 years, and Scotland became comparatively peaceful and stable. And then Duncan's son Malcolm invaded Scotland, and Macbeth was killed. He was buried in the place where people buried kings. So this story tells a little bit of a nicer perspective on Macbeth, because in the play, Macbeth is kind of awful at his job. This whole country sort of goes to ruins, and it's all about what he can get and what he can accomplish, essentially. So very different story, somewhat anyway. The general plot is the same, but the real Macbeth was liked, and Shakespeare's Macbeth not so much, because he was awful, right? But the real Macbeth was okay, even though he did kill a guy. So so like I said in the video, there was nobody to take over after Elizabeth died, and I don't know how much you know about Shakespeare, or how much you sort of learned about it, but Queen Elizabeth, who was before James I, actually really liked Shakespeare. She gave him a bunch of money. She went to all of his plays. She thought he was the greatest thing. She funded arts and things like that. Never had children, never had anybody to take over her throne. So when she died, King James took over. Shakespeare didn't like King James. King James was kind of a jerk to Shakespeare. And Shakespeare was kind of a jerk to him too. Shakespeare had a lot of money at this point. He had a lot of power in England. And when Queen Elizabeth died, a lot of that power went away. Shakespeare didn't like that. And so he sort of had a chip on his shoulder about King James too. And so the story of Macbeth, the Shakespeare Macbeth, sounds a lot like King James, because Shakespeare didn't like him. So talk a little bit about, have you guys ever watched V for Vendetta? You ever heard of that movie? It's a little bit older. Yeah. So there's some stuff in there about Guy Fawkes Day and things like that. But in 1605, there was a gunpowder plot. And essentially what happened was there were some disgruntled Catholics who didn't like King James, so they were going to blow him up. They were going to blow him up and all the people in charge of running things. And so, yeah, basically. And so there was, so Guy Fawkes was discovered guarding the hoard of explosives in the basement, which is like at in the House of Parliament on November 5th. And the traitors who were trying to blow up King James and his Parliament essentially were sentenced to death. And so people in England still celebrate November 5th as Guy Fawkes Day because he saved the king, he saved the ruling class essentially. And so Shakespeare sort of puts references of the gunpowder plot into Macbeth. And the question is, was this rebellious? And my guess would be yes, because it was still pretty fresh in everybody's minds, right? It's like there being an assassination attempt and somebody like writing a book about it right afterwards. It's usually frowned upon, right? And so Shakespeare sort of was pointing out how much he didn't like James.
Someone writing quotes, one about Abraham, one about
yeah, exactly. So when we start the play, which will be here in a little bit, there's two things happening. There's two wars going on. There's the Civil War in Scotland, so King Duncan versus MacDonald Wald. MacDonald Wald was a thane, a war thane, and he doesn't like Duncan, so he's fighting against him. There's also the National War, which is Scotland versus Norway. There's a tiny war, a big war. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of problems there. So this is just a quick summary. You don't have to really do anything with this, just something for your information, just a review. The real Macbeth killed the king, became the king, succeeded, and was murdered by the king's son. Shakespeare's Macbeth killed the king, became the king, was really bad at it, and was still murdered by the king's son. So James I, gunpowder plot, followed Elizabeth I. Macbeth probably was written to be about him, pretty much. So let's skip this part. We kind of talked about that a little bit. So what associations do you have other than the ones that are on the screen here? When I say the word witch, what do you think of? You can just tell me. Go ahead. Salem Witch Trials. What else? Yeah.
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. What else? What other things have we seen witches in? We've got a lot of Disney movies that use witches, oddly enough. Every Halloween we think of witches, right? Yeah.
Into the woods.
Into the woods, yeah. Typically when you see a witch who is a bad guy, you think of them like up there in the top left from Wizard of Oz, or green and kind of ugly looking, and maybe they're at the bottom, ugly also. Yeah.
Would Sleepy Hollow would technically have a witch, because it's the Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I think isn't the one who, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but isn't the one who, I guess, calls for the headless horseman, isn't she considered a witch? So I think you could say yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Lady in the Lake.
Lady in the Lake, yes. And when we think about witches, though, did you have something back there? Okay. When we think about witches, we don't typically think good witches, right? Unless you're thinking about Wizard of Oz, right? Yes.
Or Donna.
Okay.
Donna.
Yes. But if we're thinking about the generalized history of our entertainment experiences, witches are bad, right? And in Macbeth, they are seen as bad, but really and truly, they're not. Okay, so let's talk about some of the witchy stuff in this. Yeah.
There's one witch, I can't think the name, but she's an ancient. She was on an island in ancient Greece.
Cersei.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. So, during the time of King James, he had this weird obsession with witchcraft. And during his time in Oxford in 1605, he was said to have been visited by 3 witches who held him as the descendant of Banquo. And Banquo will be a character in Macbeth who ends up being murdered. So there's some things in there that maybe Shakespeare was sort of airing out about James that he didn't really care for, like that he wanted him to die. Right? Okay. So make sure we understand that. But James did have a weird obsession with witches, and there was something of a witch mania that happened during this time. everybody believed in witches. They thought that they were like everywhere. Um, and they would pass out these pamphlets that had these tales about witchcraft and these witches that were existing around them. And there was essentially like handing out a newspaper. So it wasn't like a conspiracy theory thing. It was just like, hey, there's witches everywhere. Let me tell you about them. They were also kind of like weirdly excited about it, right? And so a lot of people, I know a lot of you guys had me for English last year, and we read Crucible, and we talked about how people, accuse other people of witches and things like that. And that is not a unique thing to the United States, just so you know. Definitely happened in England as well. So there's some things that witches were said to have powers to do: predict the future, bring on night in the daytime, cause fogs and tempests, kill animals, curse enemies with fatal wasting diseases, means you like waste away to nothing, cause nightmares and sterility, meaning you can't have children, take demonic possession of any individual, and raise evil spirits by concocting a brew. It is also believed that witches allow the devils to suck their blood, and they accused witches were examined for the devil's mark, which is a red mark on their body. And we talked about this last year a little bit with Salem witch trials. They would look for any sort of bites or marks that were on witches. And do you guys remember the issue with that when we read about that? Could be birthmarks. Fleas were common. Lice was common. And so somebody had a bite mark. It could have just been a bug bite. But, yeah, that's neither here nor there, though, I guess. There was also talking about gender and issues with that. So misogyny is this idea that men should have power over women and they are better than women. And so between 1560 and 1603, hundreds of people, almost all of them women, were convicted as witches and executed. Okay, so could have been a way to get rid of some women who were, I don't know, not doing what they were supposed to by society standards. In 1604, an act of parliament decreed that anyone found guilty of practicing witchcraft should be executed. So it was like legally sanctioned. And those who confessed to being witches did so under torture, or because they were in the group of delusions recognized today as psychiatric disorders. So they would pick people who were struggling with their mental health, and they would convince them that they were witches, and then they would kill them. Really logical thinking there, right? And so Macbeth's audience would have felt conflicted, let's say that, about the witches in the play, because they were very interested in witches. They wanted to know more about them, but also they were really terrified of them. And so there would have been some sort of conflicted feelings happening there. They would have listened to them. They would have been afraid of them. Would have been very scary. But they also would have recognized them as evil. Okay. So let's look at a couple of the beginning parts of this. With the witches at the beginning, they sort of bring about some of the supernatural aspects that are happening here at the beginning. And so there's a trance, there's a changed appearance, and I have quotes there with you, but there's an inability to pray. If you guys remember last year in the Crucible, the inability to pray was thought as being something that made somebody a witch, right? The older guy who ends up being pressed by the stones, his wife would read a book and he couldn't think. I don't know how that worked out, but that was what he would say. And he actually ended up causing his wife to be accused of being a witch, right? And so not being able to pray, having visions, okay, disturbed behavior, feeling like you can't get it together, lack of fear. Macbeth eventually forgets how to fear things, okay? Not a good thing. Being indifferent to, and then invitations to evil spirits. Inviting evil essentially into this scenario, and that causes all kinds of issues for Macbeth, for Lady Macbeth, for the witches, okay, for all the characters really. That may be it. Maybe it is. All right. Questions so far that you have? No questions, no comments, concerns? All right, so on Classroom, there is a link there for Macbeth. It's the No Fear translation, so I want you to click on that for me. And unless you guys are just really interested in reading this out loud together, I was going to play us the audio for it. Is that okay with everybody? Give you a second to stand up. It's been a while since you've actually sat in the classroom for a long period of time. You want to stand up next to your desk and stretch for just a minute? Yeah, stand up. If you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to stand up for a minute, I'll get this ready for you. You want the light on or off?
Oh.
Okay, Mark speaking for everybody.
Act 1.
Okay, so everybody got that pulled up? While we're reading, the good thing about the No Fear Shakespeare, and yes, I know Spark Notes bad, whatever. But I have a firm belief that if I'm going to teach you this, you have to know what's going on. Okay. And so what I like about the No Fear Shakespeare is that it gives you the side by side. Okay. And so when you get to that main page, you'll click on Act 1, Scene 1. When you get to that page that I sent you on the link, hopefully the internet cooperates. Act 1, Scene 1. And you should see when you scroll down the side by side. It'll have the original text on one side and the modern text on the other. Okay. So while we're reading the original stuff, if you're confused about something they're saying, it's right there. And we'll stop periodically and we'll talk about what is happening to make sure we're all on the same page. Right? So get this going. All right. Is everybody there? Everybody ready on that page? Are you okay to listen though, to follow along? Okay. All right. So I'm gonna play this for us. And like I said, we'll stop and sort of talk once we get some new characters in there, things like that. We're gonna start with the witches. Okay.
Scene 1. A desert place. Thunder and lightning. Enter 3 witches.
When shall we 3 meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won.
That will be ere the set of sun. Where the place?
Upon the heath.
There to meet with Macbeth. I come, Gormalkin.
Haddock calls.
Anon.
Fair is foul, and foul is fair.
To the fog and filthy air.
All right. So let's stop there for the first part. So we've met the witches. Okay, they're hanging out, they're chilling, they're talking. Okay, and they are deciding when they're going to meet again, and they're saying we're going to meet in a field, and we're going to meet Macbeth there because we got some stuff to tell him. Okay, do you guys know what a familiar is? Have y'all watched the new Sabrina? You know what I'm talking about? So like she has the cat Salem, or the old Sabrina, I guess also. It's a familiar, it's like an animal that they use as like their helper. And so Grey Malkin is, Harry Potter has familiars. And so the first witch, Grey Malkin, is her cat. Okay. And the second witch, Paddock, is her toad. So you know. The thing with this is that when you get to the bottom, you do have to click through to the next page. All right. So if I feel like everybody's struggling to keep up with that, I'll try to keep you up with that as well. So go ahead and go to Act 1, Scene 2 should be the next page. And this is where we're going to meet Duncan, Malcolm, Donald, Bane, Lennox, Captain, and I think we'll meet Macbeth and Banquo in this one as well. Maybe if it's not this scene, it'll be the next one, but I'm pretty sure it's this one because they talk about how awesome Macbeth is. Right? He just loves that.
Exeunt. Act 1, Scene 2. A camp near forest. Alarm within. Enter Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain, Lennox with attendants, meeting a bleeding sergeant.
What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt, the new estate.
This is the sergeant who, like a good and hardy soldier, fought against my captivity. Hail, brave friend! Say to the king the knowledge of the broil as thou didst lead it.
Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their heart. Merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a medal, and multiplying villainies of nature do swarm on him. From the western isles of Kearns and Galloway, and quarrels smiling like our rebels. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. Disdaining with his brandished steel to a bloody execution, like valor's minion, carved out his passage to the ne'er shook hands, nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chaps, and fixed his head upon our battlements.
Okay, just so
Oh, valiant
we're
cousin,
clear
worthy gentleman.
on what happened there, Macbeth was not afraid of McDonald, and he literally split him down the middle with an axe. Just so you're clear on that. We'll make sure we're all okay on that. So Macbeth is a good soldier because he doesn't care to kill people who are the enemy. All right. So it was important at this time not necessarily to think about who it was that you were harming, who it was that you were going against. If they were a bad guy, they were on the other side, they were to die. That was it. Okay. So this captain who is bleeding and dying essentially is telling this tale about how brave Macbeth was, how awesome Macbeth was in battle, right? He wasn't even, he laughed at this guy's face and he just split him right in two. Terrifying, a little bit, okay? So go ahead and go to the next page. And I'll go ahead and start this. Duncan is saying, my brave relative, he is such a good soldier, essentially, in that last part of that last page. I promise I won't stop every single page. I just needed to clarify that.
Shipwreck, so from that spring whence comfort seemed to come, discomfort swells. Mark, King of Scotland, mark. No sooner justice with valor armed compelled these curds their heels, but the Norway law, surveying vantage with furbished arms and new supplies of men, began assault.
Dismayed not this our captains, Macbeth and Banquo?
Yes, as spurs or the hare the lion. I so see. I must report that whereas cannons overcharged with double cracks, so they doubly redouble. Except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorize another Golgotha, I cannot tell. But I faint. Cry for help.
So well thy words become thee as thy wounds. They smack of honor both. Go, get him surgeon.
Exit sergeant attended.
Who comes here?
Enter Ross.
The worthy Thane of Ross.
What a haste looks to me bad. So should he look, that seems to speak things strange.
God save the king.
Whence camest thou, worthy Thane?
From Fife, great king, where the Norwegian banners flout the sky and fan our people cold. Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict, till that Bellona's bridegroom, lapped in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious, arm against arm, curbing his lavish spirit, and to conclude, the victory fell on us.
Great happiness!
That now Sveno, the Norway's king, craves composition, nor would we deign him burial of his men till he disbursed at St. Colm's Inch $10,000 to our general use.
No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go, pronounce his present death, and with his former title, greet Macbeth.
I'll see it done.
What he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won.
Okay, so end of scene 2. We get to hear all of the great things Macbeth has done. And then at the very end, we learn that because Macbeth killed the guy who used to be the Thane of Cawdor, Macbeth gets to now be Thane of Cawdor. Okay, so he becomes royalty, essentially. All right, so this is where it all sort of begins for him. All right, so go ahead and go to the next page. Any questions so far? Okay. Can you follow along okay with the reading and the audiobook? Is that okay? All right. Okay, witches are back. You ready? They've been up to things like killing pigs.
Exit. Act 1, Scene 3.
But not real
A
pigs.
heath near forest. Thunder. Enter the 3 witches.
Where hast thou been, sister?
Killing swine.
Sister, where thou?
A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. Give me, quoth I, a rind to thee, witch, the rum-fed Runyon cries. Her husband's too Aleppo god, master of the Tiber. But in a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do, and I'll do.
I'll give thee a wind.
Thou art kind.
And I another.
I myself have all the other, and the very ports they blow. All the quarters that they know. I the shipman's card. I will drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live a man forbid. Weary 7 nights, 9 times 9, shall he dwindle, peak and pine.
So this first witch was hanging out with this lady and she was eating and wouldn't give the witch any chestnuts. So the witch got mad and said, that's fine. I'm going to go and torture your husband till he dies. So just so you know, it's going to happen. And her sisters are like, okay, cool, I'll help you. Yeah, that's what they're doing. So not going to be looked upon favorably by the audience, right? Because that woman wasn't doing anything other than eating. It just didn't want to share. Okay, so not a favorable look for the witches so far.
Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest tossed. Look what I have.
Show me, show me.
Here I have a pilot's thumb. Rectus homeward he did come.
From within.
A drum, Macbeth doth come.
The
weird
sisters, hand in hand, posted in land, thus to go about, thrice to man, thrice to man, and thrice again to make up man. Peace, the charm of that.
Enter Macbeth and Banquo.
Foul and fair a day I have not seen.
How far is called to falls? What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are armed? You, ought that man may question. By each at once, her chappy finger laying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so.
Think if you can. What are you?
All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis.
All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor.
All hail Macbeth. Thou shalt be king hereafter.
Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? In the name of truth, are ye fantastical, or that indeed which outwardly ye show? My noble partner you greet with present grace and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt with all. To me you speak not. Look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not. Speak them to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate.
Hail,
Hail,
Hail.
lesser than Macbeth, and greater.
not so happy, yet much happier.
Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So all hail Macbeth and Banquo.
Banquo and Macbeth, all hail.
Stay, ye perfect speakers. Tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I am Thane of Glamis. How of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, prosperous gentleman, and stands not within the prospect of belief no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such greeting. Speak, I charge you.
I remind you, Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor. We've already found that out. Duncan's already said he's going to do that, right? He knows he's already Thane of Glamis. Okay, so the witches have already predicted one thing to come true. That's going to be a major factor in Macbeth believing what they have to say. Okay, but they are essentially saying to Macbeth, "You're going to be all these things," and they're saying to Banquo, "You are not going to be king, but your life is going to be a lot better off because we know what Macbeth's going to do. Banquo is not going to do those things. Banquo is not going to be a king, but his children will be." Okay, so they're saying like things will happen, but not for you specifically. Okay.
Witches vanish.
The earth hath bubbles, and these are of them. Whither are they vanished?
Into the air, and what seemed corporal melted as breath into the wind. Would they had stayed.
Were such things here as we do speak about? Eaten on the insane root that takes reason prisoner.
Your children shall be kings.
Who shall be king?
And Thane of Cawdor too. Not so.
To the self-same tune and words. Who's here?
Enter Ross and Angus.
The king hath happily received, Macbeth, the news of thy success. And when he reads thy personal venture in the rebels' fight, his wonders and his praises do contend which should be thine or his. Silenced with that, and viewing o'er the rest of the self-same day, he finds thee in the stout Norwegian ranks, nothing afeard of what thyself didst make, strange images of death. As thick as hail came post with post, and every one did bear thy praises in his kingdom's great defence, and poured them down before him.
We are sent to give thee from our royal master thanks, only to herald thee into his sight, not pay thee.
And for an earnest of a greater honour, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition hail, most worthy Thane, for it is thine.
What? Can the devil speak?
The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?
Who was the Thane lives yet, but under heavy judgment bears that light which he deserves to lose, whether he was combined with those of Norway, or did lie in the rebel with hidden help and vantage, or that with both he laboured in his country's wreck, I know not, but treason's capital, confessed and proved, have overthrown him.
Aside.
Glamis and Thane of Cawdor.
To Ross and Angus.
Thanks for your pains.
To Banquo.
Do you not hope your children shall be kings, when those that gave the Thane of Cawdor to me promised no less to them?
That trusted home might yet enkindle you into the crown, besides the Thane of Cawdor. But 'tis strange. And oftentimes to win a son, the instruments of darkness tell us truth, win us with honest rivals to betray us in deepest confidence.
So Banquo is telling us essentially what's going to happen, right? Yes, the witches did tell you something that was true, but you got to be careful, because if you're not careful, then they're going to do something to you that's going to make it much worse. Okay, so the question becomes, does Macbeth become king because he's supposed to become king, or does he become king because he murders the king? Okay, so regardless, he ends up being the king.
Cousins, a word, I pray you.
Aside.
2 truths are told as happy prologues to the spelling act of the imperial theme. I thank you, gentlemen.
Aside.
This supernatural citizen cannot be ill. Be good. Given me earnest success, commencing in a truth. I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Fears are less than horrible imaginings, I thought, whose murder yet is not fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise. Nothing is, was not.
Look how our partners act.
Aside.
If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir.
New horrors come upon him like our strange garments, not to the old, but with the aid of use.
Aside.
Come what come may, time the hour runs through the roughest day.
Worthy Macbeth, we stay upon your leisure.
Give me your favor. My dull brain was wrought with things forgotten. Kind gentlemen, your pains are registered where every day I turn the leaf to read them. Let us toward the king. Think upon what hath chanced. In more time, the interim having waited, let us speak our free hearts each to other.
Very gladly.
Till then, enough. Come, friends.
So Macbeth spends the greater part of this last half of the scene talking about essentially to himself how, well, how am I supposed to become king? Am I going to become king because I have to do something? Am I going to become king because I'm not supposed to do anything at all? And so he is essentially like staring off into space, like in his own head. And Banquo's like, look at this guy. You tell him one thing and he's like losing his mind, right? So all of these things have sort of gotten into Macbeth's head, and he's not going to be able to get past them. Okay, so he has sort of had that seed planted, and he is over. He is not going to be able to get over that. Okay, all right. We're going to stop with Macbeth today. All right, I'm going to give you the remaining time in the class period to work on anything you need to work on. Whether it's in my class, you need to catch up, or whether it's in another class, you need to catch up. Okay, I know that probably you all have been without power or electric or a combination of both over the last couple of weeks. So get your work done. Okay, if you haven't had anything like that and you've had all your work done, then find something quiet to do. Okay, you can listen to music if you want to. If you have any questions, Ms. Welsh and I are both here. Okay, get to it.